after 5 grueling years of mechanical sorting and getting things wrong and learning about new problems this car has, or had, we are finally here with the 1961 300 Adenauer. So many of you have asked about this car. So many of you have wondered when the long format video is going to come. And really, just like my other videos, this is not just an interview with the car, but a mechanical and philosophical, in-depth explanation of what this car is and what it represents. And there is not a more complicated car to explain than the W189. Starting in 1952, Mercedes-Benz developed the W186, which was the predecessor to this car. It had a shorter wheelbase. It had the same 3-liter engine with a unique overhead cam valve train, but it was carbureted. And so in 1958, with all of the lessons that Mercedes had learned from the 300 SL Roadster and Gullwing, they redesigned the engine and took the fuel injection system that was used on the 300 SC and adapted it to this car so that the humble 130 horsepower engine became a 180 horsepower engine, which was very significant for the time. Given that this car weighs almost 4,000 pounds, it is by no means a vehicle for the drag strip, but it performs with an alacrity that you would not expect from a big car from the 50s. And so, now it is here, fully reliable, ready to go anywhere that anyone desires to take it, even with features like air conditioning and a spotlight. And you know, the worst part of this whole interview for me, or getting up to this point, was, is this car going to be ready? We finally took the car on a roughly 350-mile trip last weekend to Lakeland, Florida and back for the Lake Mirror Classic. And the driving experience in this car was so wonderful that it sort of negated all of the difficulties I had in getting it here and to this point. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining in with me and watching this. And I'm going to try to explain Mercedes' most complicated car to you, the 300 little d Adenauer. I usually do this last, but this is really what makes the car. So, most of you are aware by now that Mercedes pioneered the use of fuel injection on their cars. Other than the little tiny Gutbrod Superior, which had a twin-cylinder engine and a 2-plunger mechanical injection pump, Mercedes first delivered a functional gasoline fuel-injected engine in the form of the 300 SL. And after the 300 SL's success, both as a road car and a racing car in the SCCA, the reliability of this fuel injection system was unquestionably proven in the 300 SLR racing cars. Mercedes-Benz then adapted this fuel injection system in a more tame form, where it became a manifold injection system instead of a direct injection system right into the cylinders. So this beautiful injection system complemented the 3-liter Mercedes engine so well that they decided in 1958 that it was going to go into a sedan. This particular engine, in what is essentially an ancient car, produced 180 horsepower at 5,500 RPMs and would rev well past 6,000. For an engine from the 1950s in a car like this, that was virtually unheard of. Now, some people might say that the presence of the Borg-Warner 3-speed automatic, which Mercedes sourced from their relationship with Studebaker, hampered the car, but at the time, this car really needed an automatic transmission to complete the package. While a manual transmission was actually available in Europe, the US version of the 300 Adenauer came with this lovely 3-speed automatic, which is virtually unkillable, shifts pretty smoothly, but the one thing that most people can agree on is that it does not particularly complement this high revving German engine. And so as a result, the transmission has kind of been a source of, well, what do we say? Unhappiness for some people, disappointment for others. But so far, we found that with a few adjustments to the pressure control linkage and to the transmission governor, it's actually performed pretty well and makes this old car drive like a modern car in many regards. As far as work we had to do to the engine, we took the generator out and installed an alternator from HK Engineering, which fits into the same space the generator does. The reason this is so important is because this car uses a serialized water pump and generator drive, where the generator drives the water pump using a jack shaft coming out of its rear end. Without the correct length and dimensions for this part, what you end up with is basically a non-functioning alternator. So this alternator conversion was very expensive. It was extremely difficult to implement, but we got it done. And now this lovely 300D has an electrical system that supports air conditioning, an auxiliary fan, GPS, as well as making the headlights brighter and the horns more functional. We also added an AC system to this car that was more in line with the modern Mercedes-Benz product. While it was delivered with air conditioning to its new owner, we went ahead and we installed an AC compressor from a 560 SL. A lot of people like to use Sandin rotary compressors on these cars, but the Sandin is actually kind of a junky compressor. It's made in China. It's not really a long-term compressor, and it doesn't really make cold AC. We wanted this car to have cold air conditioning, so we used the Nippon Denso compressor, as well as an auxiliary cooling fan, hid it in the grill from a 123 series, and different other little parts like a 107 AC dryer, and a wiring harness that we adapted from the diagram used in the 240D. This car also has power steering, which was a first for Mercedes. And if you're wondering what this is, we added it. It is a heat shield to keep the intake manifold temperature lower, which immensely helps hot starting. These cars were notorious for hot starting issues. This one doesn't have any of them because the intake doesn't cook from exhaust heat rising upward. The body on frame construction that this car uses is a throwback to Mercedes-Benz manufactured before World War II. Prior to the war, almost all Mercedes except the 130H and the 150H and 170H used an extremely strong oval tube frame. That meant that you had a left and a right support, but you also had a giant X connecting each corner of the car that culminated in a strong central backbone tube. As a result, the frame of this car is practically bomb-proof. The same construction was used in vehicles like the 500K, the 540K, the 770K, and the V12 pre-war 600 that never entered production. These massive cars contributed so much to Mercedes-Benz engineering that they felt after the war it wasn't quite time to retire the body on frame chassis concept. And it was given one last hurrah when it was used in the 300 Adenauer. People marvel at how this car is able to be a pillarless hardtop. And in fact, the roof is not even a stressed member. Note that the B pillar only comes up to this point in the chassis. And when you roll the windows down, you get this amazing view of the entire open side of the car. You can even take the rear windows out. This specific design though, and the extended wheelbase was what made the 300D so incredibly special. Even today, this design feature of the car that Carl Wilfert absolutely demanded be retained actually makes people look at this car and recognize it not so much as just a big Mercedes S-Class, but the true predecessor of the 600. Only the 600 overshadows the 300 Adenauer in the lineage of Mercedes-Benz luxury cars, and therefore the 300 Adenauer has cemented itself in history as one of the most beautiful post-war Mercedes. While ownership costs between this car and a 600 are quite similar, this is a much more reliable, user-friendly car because the 600 uses so many hydraulic controls and so many features that were just used on singular models. Whereas this car keeps it extremely simple with its chassis and body design, as well as its electrical system and its use of manual controls for the windows and door locks. As beautiful as this car is on the outside, it's really what's on the inside that counts. The intimate connection between the W186, W189, and the 300 SL is something that really mystifies and adds a dimension to this car's character and history. The W186 birthed the 300 SL concept in 1953 and 54, and subsequently lessons that were learned on the 300 SL were fed back into the production of the W189. And so this car has more 300 SL in it than any other Mercedes except possibly the 300 SC, or of course the 300 Adenauer itself, the previous generation 300 Adenauer itself. Starting with the front axles and brakes are the exact same front axles and brakes that were used on the 300 SL Gullwing and Roadster. If you go back down through the car, the design of the drive shaft is the same unit, which is immensely strong, that was used on the 300 SL as well. It's just longer. And going back to the rear axle is the same exact rear axle that was used on the 300 SL Roadster from 1957 and onwards when it went into production. In fact, when you crack open the Mercedes-Benz service manual to work on one of these, you won't find any information on this axle in a 300 W186 manual. All the information about rebuilding this rear axle is derived from the 300 SL service manual, which is really interesting. Mercedes went ahead with the design of this car because they knew that there wasn't a more opulent car they could replace it with in a short period of time. So while the 300 Adenauer was magnificent in its execution, it was actually kind of an assembly of Mercedes-Benz best parts at the time, capped with a very elegant body that had its lines in the last generation of pre-war Mercedes, such as the W152 770K. The two things that make this car most recognizable, its grille and its roof, are two of those features that Mercedes-Benz sort of defined itself with and kept defining itself with. So this grille, of course, which is the most magnificent and prominent part of the car, has been discussed at length in our other videos. And without this grille, we're not really sure if this would be a Mercedes or not. Now, would it? Well, the truth is that this grille actually asserts this car's presence, which I really love about it. The Adenauer grille is about as tall as a small child, with a hood star that's roughly 60 millimeters in diameter. And while this isn't the exact radiator cap, you can kind of see where it came from. These were used as radiator openings before the war. But this specific grille has been mentioned so many times by people who love Mercedes that when Mercedes going forward designed the W111 and the W108 series cars, a prominent grille had to be featured in order to connect it with this car. Without the grille, it would be sort of like neutering a bull. The grille adds such presence to the car that one and the other have to coexist together. You can't take one away and keep all of the importance of the other. The roof on this car, though, is what's really amazing. Mercedes only built 62 300 Adenauer four-door convertibles. And sedans like this, well, we think about 3,500 were produced. This roof is not an entirely stressed member of the car. It's actually bolted on such that the substructure was the same for the sedan or the cabriolet. And I think that's really quite an interesting concept. Also, this was the last Mercedes-Benz that used chrome in its entirety instead of stainless. Stainless trim and anodized aluminum trim gradually supplanted chrome trim, but this is all chrome with the exception of the grille insert. That means if you're restoring one of these cars, every part has to be chromed. Now, these are the last thing that people love to ask me about. They want to know if they are air intakes. They want to know if they are war sirens. What they are horns, and the Adenauer has 5 of them. All 5 horns go off to give this car the sound of a train coming at night down the tracks in the middle of rural Germany in such a way that you never forget it if you hear it once. This isn't a nice little beep, beep with all of the horns engaged. It is a bah, bah. What it says to you is, I'm coming in a Mercedes Type 300. Get out of my way, because I am driving a superior vehicle. Whether you like that image that the car gives off or not, Mercedes undoubtedly wanted to assert their presence, not only with the car's grille or with the car's underpinnings, but with its sound. The announcement that a 300 Adenauer is coming, and this could possibly be the greatest spectacle of your life. One of the most fascinating aspects of the 300 little d was that it got a different rear end treatment. Instead of having tiny little lights mounted in the bottom of curved fenders, Mercedes added these semi-tail fins and mounted the tail light inside the fender along with the reflector. These more prominent tail lights were part of the same design language that was seen on the Ponton at the time, but not only did they increase the car's visibility, making it safer, they gave the 300D a unique and more modern rear axle. It also helped in another way. It expanded the size of the trunk. In fact, there's so much space inside this trunk that if I was 5 years old, I would be very content spending the night in there as a fort. Mercedes, though, have always had very spacious trunks. The things that I really love about this car is more on the inside, because that's where you spend all your time. So the interior of this Type 300, which is not exactly like a 600 interior, is so much more than any other Mercedes interior, except for maybe that of a 600. Now, why is that? Well, we had talked earlier about the pillarless design, including rear windows that you can remove. But what this interior says about Mercedes-Benz at the time is really what's important. Notice that Mercedes put wood and chrome everywhere they possibly could. They weren't trying to accent a bird's eye maple wood strip on the dashboard. Nope, they just made the whole dashboard out of wood. And these weren't exactly shiny or opulent woods. These were just Northern European hardwoods that typically age very well and stay very strong. And so the whole reason that they built all of this interior stuff out of wood and chrome wasn't just to make it look nice. it was to make it look tough, durable, and highly functional. You have wood on the caps of the roof, on the strips in the doors, on the tops of the doors, on the dash. And what isn't wood on the dash is chromed. And of course you have velour carpet and you have leather. This car's original interior color is olive green. And olive green was a unique color because, you know, at the time Mercedes had a better color palette, but even this olive green interior is kind of rare. Now, at some point this interior was redone, but I'm very happy with the choice of leather they used. This is probably about 20 years ago when you could surface dye leather for a lot less money. Once you look inside the interior though at the dashboard, you get more of an impression of what this car really was. Now we're doing some work to the radio faceplate, but this item is a Becker shortwave adapter. And of course it has its original Becker Mexico radio with an automatic antenna, which is pretty amazing. And you have a heavy duty steering lock, and then the AC unit that we talked about, which was installed in 1961. One of the best features though of the late production Adenauer was that it had a more modernized steering wheel from the W111 that I personally think looked better than the small center cap steering wheel used in 58 and 59. The integration of other items like the clock and the instrumentation, even the shift indicator and the radio speakers is just so marvelous because you get an interior that flows extremely well, almost like the entire thing was sculpted. And that's one of the things that I think makes the 300 Adenauer stand out today. The amount of thought put into this interior is maybe just as opulent as a pre-war interior, which used frequently a mother of pearl dash and even more chrome. And of course it puts a new Mercedes-Benz interior to shame. Looking inside this car, the most amazing thing about it for a tall person like me is the fact that the roof is convex shaped so that my head doesn't actually hit the headliner. So even though this thing has a very low and striking roof design, I can sit in it very comfortably without any issues. This car also had a number of unique features ordered by its original owner: an external temperature gauge, a high-mounted mirror, a spot lamp, which is actually on the car's build sheet, and of course this AC system, which I really love because it makes the car usable during Florida summers. And then we added a couple other small things, or in the process of adding some small things such as a tachometer. But overall, what I'm hoping is, by the way, this tachometer is from a 300 SEL 6.3. You know, this car really does retain something unique when you look at it. When you see it, you almost want to play with all the controls and all of the switches. And I think that's what makes it so much fun. The neatest thing about this car, though, is the fact that there's a switch on the dash you can use to stiffen the rear suspension in case you have a lot of people or luggage in the car, which indicates that it is a real working car, not just some fuddy-duddy car that's meant to be driven by a chauffeur. Now, these Type 300s were available with a divider. And the divider was designed so that you could be chauffeur driven. And what happened was the divider was mounted in line with this B-pillar post, and the front seats were moved forward, meaning that the back seat passengers had just a little bit of extra space. While in Europe, chauffeur-driven examples were more popular, the level of wealth in the United States ensured that this was usually a car that was owner-driven. You can close that door with just a flick of the wrist. It actually closes much better than any modern Mercedes-Benz door, which I really love. But the interior of this car, being what it is, a car that's constantly being driven and tested, might come off as a little bit cluttered. It might have some age to it, but it never loses its splendor or its level of opulence and perfection. In fact, I would say that my favorite thing about this car is that it feels like you're driving a pre-war Mercedes in some aspects, but it's as comfortable and usable as a modern Mercedes-Benz. When I started working on this car, it was a massive challenge for me to understand this vehicle, both mechanically and philosophically. In fact, these cars are so poorly understood mechanically, and they're so mysterious, even to most Mercedes aficionados, that having the opportunity to touch one and service one and do restoration work on one, or perform restoration work on one, is really a life-changing experience. So what I hope to do was bring some of that life-changing momentum to you guys so that I could expose you to the beauty of the 300 Adenauer. And at the end of the day, after wrestling with so many questions about the meaning of this car's existence, I learned and really became aware of one thing, that this was the best car Mercedes-Benz had to offer at the time. So, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for checking out our channel if this is your first time. If you haven't liked our video, please do so. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we invite you to do so as well. Please leave your comments below. Hit the bell for notifications. And thanks to our Patreon supporters, we've been able to film this video. Please consider contributing to our channel on Patreon so we can bring you more amazing content that no other Mercedes-Benz oriented channel on YouTube brings you. Thank you so much and happy motoring.